Have you ever been told, not with a shout, not with an open insult, but with a thin smile, sharp as a blade, that you don't belong here? The kind of rejection wrapped in the words policy and procedure, the kind that knots your stomach before your mind even catches up. Just one look, one tone of voice. And in their eyes, you've been measured, weighed, and found lacking. That's exactly what happened to Malik Davenport on a Tuesday afternoon, somewhere between the jet bridge and seat 1A in first class. He had paid for that seat, booked it weeks in advance. But the woman in the navy blue uniform took one glance and decided he couldn't possibly be a real premium passenger. Her voice was sweet, but each word landed cold as steel. "Sir, this seat is reserved for premium guests. I'll have to ask you to step aside." And just like that, the airplane cabin turned into a stage. Phones were raised quietly, almost in unison, like sunflowers tilting toward the light, waiting for the scene to unfold. In that moment, Malik could have argued, could have raised his voice, could have caused a scene. But he chose to stand still, silent, watching. Because he knew something they didn't. What would you say if I told you that within the next 30 minutes, the man they were trying to push out of that seat would turn this entire flight, this airline, and even the industry upside down without losing his composure for a single second? What if this wasn't just about a seat, but a textbook lesson in how quiet power can shatter loud prejudice? They saw a black man in first class and assumed he was cheating the system. What they didn't see was the pen in his briefcase, ready to sign off on pulling $500 million from this company. And they had no idea that this passenger problem was about to trigger an earthquake. So, buckle up. Because before this plane leaves the ground, you'll see for yourself how Malik Davenport turns an insult into a seismic shift. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel as we uncover the hidden corners of injustice. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a single story, because the next one might be yours. And now, let's step into the moment it all began. The sound of footsteps on carpet, the glow of warm yellow light, and a voice drawing closer, carrying a storm with it. Have you ever been told you don't belong, even when you've paid for your place? Not with a shout or an outright insult, but with a passing glance, a breath just slightly shorter than usual, and a smile measured precisely to hide the judgment behind it. First class that afternoon carried the stillness of a late autumn day. Soft yellow light drifted over the rows of seats like a thin layer of mist, settling over the dark brown leather, wide, smooth, and cool to the touch. On the folded tray tables, a few crystal glasses clinked faintly, the delicate sound a reminder that this was a place of quiet and hierarchy. The scent of polished wood from the overhead compartments mingled with the faint citrus of freshly offered hot towels, creating an atmosphere at once refined and distant. In seat 1A, Malik Davenport sat as though time had nothing to do with him. The newspaper rested neatly in his hands, its pages open just enough to reveal the headline of a financial analysis. His eyes moved calmly across the lines, unaffected by the furtive glances around him. One leg crossed loosely over the other, the shine of his brown leather shoes catching the light on the thick carpet. Sunlight angled through the window, tracing the fine stitching on his charcoal gray suit jacket. He spoke to no one. No small talk with the crew, no phone in hand, no effort to draw attention. But there was something about Malik, a stillness so unshakable, almost impenetrable, that made those entering the cabin look twice. A few passengers lingered with their gaze, as if trying to slot him into a story they thought they already knew. The boarding continued, the roll of suitcase wheels blending with standard greetings. First class, though quiet, felt like it was waiting for a spark to break the order. Malik turned a page, eyes brushing over a photo of an upcoming aviation deal. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but a flicker of recognition at something only he understood. Whether he knew it or simply knew it too well, the moment that would break the stillness was approaching. Footsteps light yet deliberate, the scent of perfume sharper than the recycled cabin air. A voice was about to speak, one that would pull every gaze in the cabin toward him like filings to a magnet. And in that instant, every unspoken question, every quiet judgment would find its excuse to surface. Malik remained still, not a wasted movement, as though he had already read this scene in the script. Because once the words were spoken, this flight would no longer be just another flight. Clara Simmons entered Malik's line of sight like someone accustomed to controlling a stage. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, a crisp white collar peeking beneath the navy vest, the airline silk scarf tied neatly at her neck. Her smile was a work of precision, polite enough to meet service standards, cool enough to deliver the real message. "Sir, I believe this seat is reserved for premium guests," Clara said, each word coated in sugar but hiding a sharp blade. She didn't lean down as attendants often did. She stood straight, chin slightly raised, her eyes sweeping over Malik as if assessing an unfamiliar item. Just behind her stood a tall, lean white man with slicked-back hair and a pale suit that stood out in the cabin. Gregory Hale. His face carried the confidence of someone accustomed to priority rows, where greetings came with champagne before the seatbelt sign lit. He said nothing at first, just tilted his head, a look that spoke of someone who believed hierarchy was a law of nature, and he sat at the top. The atmosphere in first class shifted. The elegant stillness thickened, like a thin curtain pulling back to reveal something unpleasant. A few passengers looked up from their laptops, eyes darting between Clara and Malik. A man in row 2 leaned toward his wife, whispering something. Then came the phones. Not rushed, not obvious, just quiet, synchronized motions, a hand slipping into a coat pocket, a thumb unlocking a screen, a camera ready. As if everyone knew that in moments like these, silence didn't mean disengagement. It meant participating in the safest way possible. Malik looked up, meeting Clara's eyes for just a second, long enough to register the confidence in her squared shoulders and grounded stance. Then his gaze shifted to Gregory, who still stood like the only rightful occupant of the space. Malik said nothing. Even the crease of his folded newspaper remained undisturbed. Clara leaned in, not to be friendly, but to close the gap. "There must have been a mistake with the seat assignment," she said, her voice still sweet, though each final syllable clicked shut like a closing door. Malik stayed silent, letting the emptiness in her words echo in the space between them. There's a subtle difference between someone waiting to answer and someone waiting to watch the other reveal themselves. Malik chose the latter, and in the next seconds, that choice would make the entire cabin realize this was no ordinary passenger-crew exchange. When Clara spoke again, she crossed a line she had clearly considered beforehand. Her voice held the same surface sweetness, but now with a harder edge of authority. "Sir, I'll need you to present your ticket and the credit card used to purchase it for security verification." The phrase security verification dropped like a pebble in still water, sending ripples across the cabin. A few passengers glanced up, their eyes a mix of curiosity and avoidance. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew this wasn't something a first-class passenger usually heard. Malik looked up slowly, as if stepping out of an important thought. His smile wasn't wide, just enough to make it impossible to read his mind. His gaze stayed steady, unshaken. "When was the last time you asked a first-class passenger to show their credit card?" The question landed softly, without anger, but with the weight of an unexpected mirror being held up. Clara blinked, not dramatically, but enough to betray that she hadn't anticipated a question in place of compliance. The cabin's energy shifted again. The tension wasn't just between Clara and Malik anymore, it was shared by the onlookers. They realized this wasn't the reply of a man who would shrink. In seat 2B, a young black woman set her orange juice down and took out her phone. "Sorry, but this is ridiculous. I'm recording," she said, her voice slightly shaky but firm. Her fingers flew as she opened a live stream. Within seconds, a title appeared: First Class, Second Class Treatment. The viewer count climbed. Dozens, then hundreds. Hearts and comments rolled in. "This is blatant discrimination. Ask her name. Zoom in." Clara glanced at the young woman, irritation clear, but her eyes returned to Malik. He sat there, one hand resting lightly on his newspaper, as though time itself followed his lead. In that moment, his calm was what made Clara lose her footing. Gregory, still standing behind her, let out a thin smile. "Probably just in the wrong cabin," he said, as though playing the part of the reasonable witness. But his comment only drew more phones closer. Because everyone knew, once a story starts getting recorded and shared, it doesn't stay about a mistaken seat. In a brief moment, Malik's eyes returned to the newspaper, landing on a headline about a multi-million-dollar aviation deal. The corner of his mouth lifted again, as if he'd just found a detail far more interesting than anyone else realized. And in that moment, no one in first class knew they had just touched the fuse to something that would shake far more than this flight. Clara remained planted in front of seat 1A, her body positioned as if it were the only legitimate doorway into first class. It wasn't just about performing her duties, it was a silent barrier, an invisible line between those who belong and everyone else. Her eyes stayed fixed on Malik, hands clasped in front of her stomach. The posture steady on the surface, but the faint tension in her knuckles hinted at the strain beneath. Gregory, apparently unable to resist his role in this unfolding drama, leaned toward Clara, his voice dripping with polite condescension. "I think you might have boarded the wrong cabin. Not everyone understands how the priority system works." The words slipped from Gregory's mouth with ease, but the meaning hung thick in the air. Malik turned his head toward him, gaze calm yet lingering just long enough for Gregory to feel the weight of being directly addressed. "How long have you been flying this route?" Malik asked, his tone measured, conversational almost. "Over 10 years, Gregory replied quickly, pride curling into his voice. "And in those 10 years, have you ever had to show your credit card to sit in your seat?" Gregory faltered. The pause was small but heavy, enough for a few nearby passengers to raise their brows. Malik hadn't raised his voice, but the question cut into the foundation they believed was solid. Clara stepped in. "This isn't personal, sir. We just need to ensure—" "Ensure what?" Malik interrupted, his expression unchanged. "That I couldn't have purchased this seat? Or that I shouldn't be sitting here?" The question landed like a stone on still water, its ripples moving silently through the cabin. Passengers glanced at each other, some avoiding eye contact, others clearly weighing the same thought Malik had just spoken aloud. Gregory let out a short, dry chuckle. "You're a misunderstanding. It's just procedure. Our people know me. I'm a priority member, so things are easier." "Easier for who?" Malik asked, his tone still light, as if they were at a cafe debating over coffee. The question lingered, unanswered. Phones rose higher, angles adjusted to frame Clara, Gregory, and Malik in the same shot. A young man in row 3 leaned closer to catch every word. Clara shifted her weight, calculating her next move. Malik remained seated, one leg loosely crossed, his hand resting on a folded newspaper. No sign of strain, but the very ease in his posture pressed the tension back toward his opponents. Because when someone refuses to follow the script you've written for them, fear begins to creep in. Fear of what might happen next, and that moment was closing in fast. The woman in seat 2B's phone screen glowed brighter, the warm cabin lights reflecting off the glass. The livestream title stood out in bold: First Class, Second Class Treatment. The viewer count ticked upward, dozens to hundreds in under a minute. Comments scrolled rapidly. "This is racism. Zoom in on the attendant. This guy's handling it like a pro." The sound of rolling luggage from the rear cabin continued, but here the atmosphere had transformed. It was no longer the poised quiet of luxury. It was a dense, watchful silence where every small sound was amplified. Clara and Gregory stood framed at the center of it all, every lens trained on them. In row 3, an older couple leaned toward each other. The woman whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Her husband nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the scene ahead. They didn't intervene, not out of agreement, but because they were from a generation taught that silence avoided trouble, even when the trouble in front of you was hard to stomach. Malik sat unmoved under the weight of the stares. He didn't hide from the cameras, but he didn't court them either. He simply waited, eyes on Clara, with the patience of someone who knew the right moment to act hadn't arrived yet. More phones lifted, catching Clara, Gregory, and Malik together in one frame. A strange field of sunflowers turning toward the same source of light, except here the light was tension itself. The live stream chat exploded. This is why I stopped flying this airline. Somebody ask where in the policy this is. This man is a master at staying calm. Each message wasn't just commentary, and it was pressure seeping into the cabin, wrapping around the confrontation. Gregory straightened his posture, tugging at his tie as though preparing to take the floor. But all he managed was a clipped, "I just want to sit in my seat." Malik didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly, his calm making the statement sound like a weak excuse. Clara seemed to realize control was slipping away. She wasn't speaking only to a passenger anymore. She was performing in a theater she hadn't chosen, with an audience both inside this cabin and far beyond it. Drawing a quiet breath, she steadied herself. Her tone stayed polite, but each word now felt like it had been combed over in a corporate training manual. "We're simply following airline policy, and there are certain security concerns that must be verified," she said, leaning on policy and security concerns as if they were an invisible shield. She didn't say race or appearance, but the absence of the words was louder than their presence. Malik leaned forward slightly, no rush, no aggression, closing the distance between them. And perhaps for Clara, the world seemed to close in with it. "Specifically," he said, voice even and low, "what about my appearance concerns you?" The cabin skipped a beat. The engine hum was still there, the distant wheel roll still audible, but here the air felt compressed. Eyes that had been on screens lifted. A man in row 3 froze mid-fold of his newspaper. The woman in 2B brought her camera closer, sensing this was the turning point. Clara opened her mouth, then shut it. It took only a second, but the hesitation was enough for both the cabin and the livestream audience to register discomfort. "This isn't about you personally," she began. "We just need to follow proper procedure." "Procedure applies to everyone," Malik replied instantly, his tone unchanged. "Are you applying it to everyone, or only to me?" The ripple came again, subtle but sharp. A man in the seat behind leaned forward, unwilling to miss the answer. But none came. Clara's hands tightened together, the silence stretching until it became its own unspoken reply. Gregory shifted, trying to drag the exchange elsewhere. "He's just being difficult. Our people know me. I'm a priority member. I don't go through this." Malik turned toward him, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. One without warmth. "So, the thing that makes it easier isn't the procedure. It's that they know you, or it's how you look." Gregory closed his mouth. Clara's gaze dropped to the floor as if searching for somewhere else to be. But Malik stayed upright, hand resting lightly on the folded paper, as though this were still just a casual conversation. And it was that composure, that quiet, unshaken center, that pressed the weight of the moment fully onto the other side. Because if they couldn't answer now, what was coming next would force them to answer in front of everyone. Patricia Lowell entered the cabin with the walk of someone who had handled crises before the plane doors closed. Her hair was pinned into a neat bun, every strand in place as if measured with a ruler. She carried herself with the air of a woman who believed that her mere presence could restore order. Her eyes swept over the scene. Clara standing firmly in front of seat 1A, Gregory with arms crossed like a goalkeeper guarding the net, and Malik sitting still, gaze calm as a mirror that reflected nothing back. It took Patricia only a second to recognize she'd walked into something sensitive, but when she spoke, her voice carried the trained smoothness of corporate diplomacy. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm the shift manager. It seems there's been some sort of mix-up with the seating." Gregory seized the opportunity immediately, his voice pitched higher than usual, as if afraid anyone might miss the point. "I've already explained. I'm a platinum priority member with this airline. I fly this route every month. Nothing like this has ever happened before." The phrase platinum priority rolled out like an incantation, repeated with the faith that it alone could end the debate. Gregory straightened his back, chest puffed out as though his membership badge was gleaming for everyone to see. Patricia gave a small nod, her lips pulling into a thin smile. "I understand, sir. We always value our loyal customers. However, She paused, turning to Malik. I'll need to verify your information to prevent any further confusion. Malik didn't rush to answer. He looked at Patricia, not with the eyes of someone seeking sympathy, but with the measured appraisal of a man assessing a new player in a high-stakes match. You're calling it a mix-up. But where exactly is the mix-up? Patricia blinked once. It could be a system error or a duplication in priority seating assignments. Gregory cut in, voice firm like he was laying down hard evidence. I've never seen a passenger like him in this cabin. It's definitely a seating mistake. Malik tilted his head slightly as if weighing the statement. Maybe you've never seen it, he said evenly. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. Patricia pressed her lips together, sensing the situation wasn't going to untangle as easily as she'd hoped. The air in the cabin remained thick, and the phones stayed raised, their lenses drinking in every detail. Gregory clenched his fists, apparently convinced that the louder he repeated platinum priority, the stronger his position became. What he didn't realize was that each repetition only highlighted the gulf between two worlds, and sharpened a question that soon someone would have to answer. A question that would not be easy to swallow. Malik sat upright, one hand resting lightly on the folded newspaper in his lap. His expression held no irritation, only the calm of someone who knew he was the one in control. When Patricia finished with, "We need to verify your information," he leaned his head slightly, his voice low but deliberate. "Then show me the written policy. The one that says a first-class passenger must present their credit card after boarding." The question dropped into the first-class cabin like a drop of dark ink in clear water. Every eye shifted from Patricia to Clara, as though waiting for one of them to produce a stamped document that could settle the matter instantly. Clara blinked, tilting her head slightly toward Patricia in search of backup. Patricia's lips pressed together before her gaze flicked to Gregory, then back to Malik. "I would have to check on that," she admitted, her voice still professional but with less of its earlier certainty. "Check on it," Malik replied evenly, "which means you don't have it now, or it's never existed." Gregory scoffed as if the question didn't deserve an answer. But he offered none. And it was the silence that revealed the weakness more than any admission could. In seat 2B, the live stream camera zoomed closer on Clara's face, catching the flicker of an averted gaze. Someone in row 4 raised their phone higher, framing Patricia in shot, the image trembling slightly. Not from fatigue, but from the awareness that they were recording something that might soon become evidence. The live chat flooded. "Ask for the policy. They won't find it. Record everything. This is proof." The viewer count climbed past 1,000, with hearts floating upward in steady streams. Patricia drew in a breath, readying what she must have thought would be her counter. "Sir, we just want to ensure that all our customers have a safe and comfortable experience." Malik leaned forward, voice deep and steady, each word cutting with precision. "Safe and comfortable, and for who?" A long silence followed. Beneath the constant hum of the engines, no one could answer. Clara stared at her shoes. Gregory turned his head away, and Patricia remained standing, but with her hands faintly tightening. In that moment, it wasn't just that they were being questioned. They were standing under the harsh light of thousands of watching eyes, both inside the cabin and far beyond it. And that light was beginning to reveal a truth none of them wanted to say aloud. Malik knew one more sentence could tilt the entire narrative into territory they would no longer control. A crackle from Patricia's radio broke the air, 99. Brief, but enough to signal that this had been escalated to the next level. "Security is on their way," she said, the words functioning as both warning and lifeline for a situation already slipping from her grasp. Malik didn't move. He sat there, hands loosely clasped at his waist, gaze fixed ahead as though contemplating something far beyond this cabin. This was not the forced calm of someone hiding panic. It was the stillness of a man who saw no reason to rush. Clara stepped back half a pace, glancing at Gregory as if to prompt him to deliver another blow. But Gregory only cleared his throat, perhaps sensing that this stage no longer favored him. The cabin air felt heavier. The woman in 2B adjusted her camera, widening the frame to catch Malik, Clara, Patricia, and the open space where security would soon appear. Live comments poured in. "Don't move. This is the moment. The world is watching." Malik dipped his head slightly, avoiding the direct glare of the overhead light, or perhaps hiding the faintest, thinnest smile. Not of amusement, but of recognition. He'd already seen what was coming next, a shift the others hadn't yet imagined. Footsteps sounded from the front of the cabin. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to suggest this wasn't a flight attendant. All eyes turned toward the source. Before the deep Navy uniform of security appeared, there was a moment of near total stillness. Still enough for the sound of a newspaper page turning in row 4 to be distinct. Still enough for the single inhale of someone behind to register in the air. And in that stillness, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if the familiar script would play out, or if something entirely different was about to unfold. Malik didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. His posture, straight-backed, feet grounded, gaze steady, belonged to someone about to take a seat at a negotiation table, not someone about to be escorted away. And it was in that precise moment that the same thought surfaced among those watching. If this was really just a mix-up, why did they need security? The answer to that would not only define what happened next, it would open an entirely new chapter for this flight. Malik placed a hand on the armrest and rose with deliberate slowness, as though weighing each movement. The dark brown leather briefcase, what worn with age but meticulously cared for, came up from the floor in his grasp. His eyes dropped briefly, then lifted, passing over Clara and Gregory with just enough resignation to make it seem he'd decided to leave seat 1A. Gregory smiled. A victor's smile stripped of grace. The kind worn by someone convinced they'd just taught a lesson about hierarchy and the right to be here. In his mind, the matter was settled, order restored. Clara exhaled, her shoulders dropping as if shedding an invisible weight. She glanced at Patricia with a silent look that read, "It's done," then stepped half aside to clear the aisle. All signs suggested the moment had arrived for the flight to slip back into its routine. But Malik didn't walk away. He paused, one hand on the briefcase handle, eyes sweeping the cabin. There was something in that look that made phone holders lift their devices higher, their lenses drawn toward him. Those seated nearby could sense a subtler tension building beneath the thin veneer of restored peace. Gregory shifted to slide into the seat he now believed rightfully his. Clara adjusted her service smile toward him, aiming to close this scene as neatly as possible. Malik turned not toward the aisle, but back to face them. The pause wasn't long, just enough to make both Clara and Gregory stall. His gaze was calm, his voice light, without a single sharp note. "I think you might want to hear this before I leave the seat." Clara's brow tightened. Gregory tilted his head, irritated at the needless prolonging of what he thought was finished. Malik didn't rush. He placed the briefcase on the folding tray and unlatched it. The click of metal carried sharply in the pressurized air, a signal that whatever ending they had imagined was about to be rewritten. And in that moment, the attentive would realize, Malik had never intended to leave the seat. He'd been preparing for a conversation none of them were ready to hear. What he was about to say would change everything. Malik drew his phone from his breast pocket, his movements unhurried, almost unrelated to the tension hanging over the cabin. He swiped the screen, tapped a familiar contact. As the call connected, his voice was low and clear, pitched to carry to every ear in reach. "Daniel, cancel the vote on that $500 million acquisition." The first-class cabin seemed to lose all sound. Even the steady drone of the engine slipped to the background of awareness. Only Malik's words remained, quiet but sharp, slicing through the thick air. A few frowned in confusion, but to anyone who followed business news, that sentence landed like an unexpected blow. Then he added another detail. A heavier stone dropped into an already still pond. Why, with the airline we're flying on today? If the earlier silence had been dense, now it was frozen solid. A few jaws dropped. A man in row 2 let a pen fall from his hand. The young woman in seat 2B lifted her phone closer, the frame trembling because her grip was no longer steady. Clara stood rooted. Patricia blinked, her first clear sign of disorientation. Gregory, so sure of himself from the start, faltered half a step, his gaze darting between Malik and Patricia as if searching for an explanation. The livestream chat exploded. What just happened? He canceled a $500 million deal? Is he an investor? Viewer numbers surged into the thousands in seconds. Malik didn't single anyone out with his eyes. He spoke again into the phone, steady and unhurried. And Daniel, tell the board this is final. We will not invest in a company that operates like this. He ended the call, slid the phone back into his pocket, and sat down in 1A as if he'd never planned to leave. The gesture was simple, but to those who had just watched, it was the period that ended any illusion they still held about controlling the situation. A passenger behind whispered, But the sentence broke, even they not fully believing what they'd heard. Clara swallowed hard, searching for words and finding none. Gregory stood there, pride shattered into pieces too small to reassemble quickly. Patricia held her ground as if waiting for a cue from somewhere else to know what to do next. Only Malik knew. That call was just the beginning. What came next would ensure this cabin and this airline would never forget this flight. He set the briefcase back on the tray, turned his seat toward the three now lined up before him. His voice was deep, precise, each word deliberate enough that no one could claim to have misheard. Clara. He addressed the lead attendant plainly, no titles, no courtesy padding. Just her name, but weighted with the fact that someone had been placed in the position of having to answer. Clara blinked, fingers tightening on the edge of her uniform skirt. Patricia. He turned to the gate manager. Her name carried no accusation, yet not a trace of unnecessary politeness. Patricia straightened slightly, but her gaze shifted, seeking some anchor behind him. And then, Gregory. The final name hung heavy. Gregory inhaled, trying to smile as if nothing serious had happened, but the twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed the cracks in his confidence. The cabin was silent. No one moved save for the slow adjustments of those holding phones to capture better angles. On the young woman's screen in 2B, the viewer count ticked upward. 7,000, 8,000, past 10,000 in under a minute. Malik leaned back slightly, his gaze sweeping the cabin. In just a few minutes, he said, the three of you managed to turn a $500 million transaction into nothing. And you did it without even knowing you were doing it. A murmur rippled from the back rows, someone starting, "Oh my God, before cutting themselves off," as every eye stayed locked on Malik. The livestream comments rolled endlessly. That's the CEO. He flipped the table. Zoom in closer. The viewer count jumped past 15,000, then 18,000. Malik didn't look at the phone, but it was clear he knew the audience outside was swelling by the second. He didn't raise his voice, but every sentence fell clean into the compressed air. I don't need to shout. I don't need to threaten. I just need to state the truth. And let you realize for yourselves what you've cost. Clara's hands were tight fists. Patricia pressed her lips thin. Gregory stared at his shoes, avoiding eye contact for the first time since boarding. In that moment, the roles had fully reversed. The man told to give up his seat was now the one everyone stood listening to. And with each passing second, the sheer number of witnesses, in the cabin and beyond, made the weight of it multiply. Because what Malik was about to reveal next wouldn't just silence the three in front of him. It would make the entire airline tremble. Malik's phone vibrated in his hand. The screen lit up, displaying a name only a handful in the airline industry would recognize. He swiped to answer, tapped the speaker icon. A soft beep echoed through the cabin. And then a voice rolled in, cold and sharp as a draft slipping under a closed door. Mr. Davenport, this is Raymond Cole, CEO of the airline. The weight in his voice was that of a man who'd weathered 1,000 crisis meetings, but under it was a thin layer of strain he couldn't quite hide. Malik didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone listening to feel that no matter who was on the line, the conversation's control rested firmly with him. Raymond spoke again, keeping his tone carefully measured. I've just been briefed about the situation on your flight. First, allow me to extend on behalf of the airline my apologies for any inconvenience caused. That last word, inconvenience, slipped out like silk. But the mismatch between it and the reality unfolding here was glaring. A few passengers smirked, biting back laughter. Malik tilted his head, eyes locked on Clara, Patricia, and Gregory, now frozen in place like an involuntary audience. Inconvenience, he repeated, voice even, each syllable cutting clean. Are you sure that's the word you want? Raymond hesitated for a beat. I understand the matter is more serious, and I want to address it immediately within my authority. In C2B, the young woman adjusted her phone to catch both Malik and the speaker's voice. The live stream comments flared. The CEO's on the line. Now it's serious. Main event starts now. Viewership climbed past 20,000, hundreds joining by the second. Malik leaned back, voice steady, low. If you truly want to resolve it, then we'll do it. Right here, in front of everyone watching. On the other end, silence. A vacuum that swallowed the sound in the cabin. When Raymond spoke again, the composure was still there, but the weight was heavier now. If that's what you require, I'm prepared. The air in the cabin shifted. Every lens, every gaze was locked on Malik. Because they all knew. When a CEO agrees to negotiate in public, whatever follows will be remembered. And retold for years. The only question left, what would Malik demand first? He straightened, voice clear, carrying the calm authority of a boardroom address. Mr. Cole, we're going to settle this here. 5 conditions, not one less. The cabin went still. Seat 2B's camera leaned closer. Her viewer count spiked from 20 to 25,000 in seconds. First, Malik said, eyes passing over Clara, terminate every employee directly involved in today's discrimination. If they can do this in front of dozens of witnesses and thousands watching live, imagine what they do when no one's looking. Clara's fingers tightened together. Gregory cleared his throat but said nothing. Second, mandatory bias training for every customer-facing employee. Not some online box ticking, but live in-depth programs with real experts. Cost? Far less than the lawsuits you'll face for discrimination. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm sure your legal department can do the math. Gregory shifted his weight, his stance no longer solid. Third, install cameras for every staff-customer interaction. Footage stored in the cloud, monitored by an independent third party. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear. From row 3, a man smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says he's got a point. Fourth, monthly diversity audits made public. No more hiding numbers. Transparency is the only proof of commitment. Unless, Mr. Cole, you'd rather wait until your stock slides a few more points. A faint hiss from the back row. Clara's eyes flicked that way, then dropped again. And finally, every discrimination complaint goes straight to top leadership within 24 hours. No filters, no delays, no shields. Malik's hand rested on his briefcase. 5 points. Simple, practical, and you're far cheaper than what your company's been paying since I boarded. On the line, Raymond was silent for several seconds. It wasn't the connection. It was the pause of a man who knew he'd been cornered. And everyone in the cabin understood. His next words would decide whether this was just a viral PR disaster or the start of a full system overhaul. In 2B's livestream feed, comments blurred too fast to read. Short, sharp bursts like the roar from a stadium's edge. Drag them! This is how you do it. Quiet power wins. Each one added weight, not for Malik, but for the 3 standing before him. Clara's gaze dropped as though every camera lens was a spotlight on her mistake. Gregory's folded arms no longer held steady. His fingers tapped at his sleeve. Patricia stood tall, but her shoulders lifted slightly, betraying tension. Malik didn't glance at the phone. He didn't need to know the viewer count had surged into the tens of thousands. He spoke slowly, each word like the deliberate strike of a gavel. If a company lets this happen in front of dozens of witnesses. He paused, eyes sweeping the trio. I don't need to imagine what happens when no one's watching. The words weren't a blade's thrust. They were the grind of a dull knife, wearing down until the sting was undeniable. The comments surged again. Exactly, that's the point. He's breaking them with truth. Malik pressed on, his tone unchanged but carrying the kind of weight you couldn't look away from. Today, I'm here, and I have the means to make myself heard. But if it had been another passenger, no cameras, no thousands watching, how would this have ended? Seat 2B's phone tilted closer for a tight shot of Malik's face. More comments. That's it, core of the issue. Not just about a seat. Malik leaned forward, hands clasped on the tray like a private negotiation. Except this first-class cabin was now the most public space imaginable. Mr. Cole, he said, slow and distinct. This isn't about saving a deal. It's the last chance to save your airline's reputation. A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin. Gregory glanced at Patricia. She only pressed her lips tighter. Clara kept her eyes down, searching for anywhere to look that wasn't Malik. The live stream burned hotter. Newest comments. He just put the whole airline on trial. Lesson for every company. And they all knew whatever Malik said next might be the final sentence for an entire brand. Malik unlatched his briefcase and drew out a slim tablet, the screen glowing to life with crisp graphs and hard numbers. No preamble, no polite throat clearing. He angled it toward the row ahead so the front seats could see every detail, then spoke in a voice as steady and precise as if he were briefing a financial oversight committee. The airline stock, he began, eyes never leaving the display, has dropped 3% in the last 40 minutes. That's more than $170 million in market value. Gone. A few people shifted in their seats. Patricia cast a quick glance at Clara, but neither spoke. Malik pressed on, his tone as mechanical and relentless as a counting machine. This quarter's projected revenue, according to your own internal report, was already down $45 million after that PR incident earlier this year. Now, imagine what that number looks like after this live stream spreads across every platform in the next 24 hours. Gregory's jaw tightened, but the confident light in his eyes had dimmed. Clara's gaze stayed locked on the floor, her fingers tightening around the hem of her skirt. With one swipe, Malik pulled up another spreadsheet. Cost to overhaul your entire anti-discrimination system? He paused, eyes flicking toward the speakerphone. Roughly $15 million. That covers training, monitoring systems, and regular audits. Another swipe. Cost to keep feeding discrimination as you're doing now? Last year, lawsuits and settlements alone bled you for $23 million. Add to that the brand damage, not immediately measurable in cash, but anyone in this room knows it corrodes revenue for years. Malik finally looked up, sweeping his gaze across each face. So tell me, Mr. Cole, which is the smarter investment? $15 million to fix the route? Or tens of millions every year to keep putting out fires like today? No one answered. First class fell into a strange kind of silence. Not the pleasant quiet of comfort, but the stiff, airless pause of being forced to stare at a truth too sharp to look away from. He set the tablet down on the folded tray table, fingers lacing together. You could call this a math problem. I call it a bill. One your company writes for itself every time it lets bias run your customer service. The live stream exploded with comments. Numbers don't lie. Exactly. Like speak their language. Money. Dead on. Malik leaned back slightly, his expression calm. He didn't need to pound the table or raise his voice. The figures had done the work for him. Bullets wrapped in steel, cutting clean through the soft phrasing and procedure masks they'd been hiding behind. And everyone understood. If the first half of this equation had frozen them in place, the next half Malik was about to reveal would leave them with no way out. Notification chimes lit up the cabin. The woman in 2B, still live streaming, read off updates. CNN just picked this up. Live. Another. Fox and MSNBC too. She swung the camera toward the front, catching Clara and Gregory, their faces now not just seen by nearby passengers, but plastered across countless social media accounts, pinned to tweets shared thousands of times. Gregory caught sight of himself on a fellow passenger's screen and darted his eyes away, as if avoiding the look could make the image disappear. Clara stood stiff, trying to maintain a service smile that had already lost its practiced curve. Twitter's feed detonated. First-class racism caught live. Name the crew, tag the airline. The world's watching. Screenshots spread like an oil slick, each one carrying calls for a boycott. A man in row 3 sank deeper into his seat, eyes fixed forward. An older woman in row 4 lowered her magazine, hands clasped tight, silent but unwilling to look away. The air thickened, as if someone had drained half the oxygen from the cabin. Outside, the engines droned on, but in here, every small sound was magnified. A zipper closing, a glass being set down, the faint swallow of a dry throat. Malik sat motionless, ignoring the phones and the news tickers, as though the media storm swelling outside was just background noise to a chess match he'd been playing all along. His composure only amplified the pressure. When one man stands unshaken, everyone else feels the tremor more. Patricia flicked her eyes toward the cabin door as if hoping rescue would walk in. But no one came. No voice cut in to smooth over or stop the scene. All they had now were the stares of passengers, the unblinking eyes of phone lenses, and the millions watching in silence. Online, the feed rolled on. "This is why you record everything. Don't let them walk away. Who's at HQ? Get ready." Malik lifted his chin slightly, as though finally acknowledging the scale of what was unfolding. But instead of looking rattled, he smiled. Brief, knowing, enough to make those filming wonder. What does he know that we don't? They wouldn't have to wait long. Whatever came next would freeze the room all over again. Malik placed both hands on the table, fingers interlocked, the posture of a man about to deliver a verdict everyone would remember. He didn't glance at the phones or the scrolling headlines. The numbers, the viral pull quotes, and the tens of thousands watching were just the backdrop to this moment. "In the digital age," he began, voice no louder than a calm conversation, "discrimination isn't just wrong, it's expensive." The words dropped into the cabin like a stone into still water, striking the taut wire of tension that had held for over an hour. No camera clicks, no throat clears. Even the engine's hum seemed to fade, making room for the heaviness that followed. Clara swallowed hard, staring at her shoes like she'd just spotted an invisible scuff to focus on. Gregory shifted, arms uncrossing. A small movement, but enough to show a loss of command. Patricia sat upright, but her shoulders were tight, a fortress braced for impact. Malik let the sentence hang, soaking into everyone. Not just the three in front of him, but the passengers nearby and the distant viewers who would clip, post, and make it the headline for the whole story. On the live stream, the comment stream burst, "Quote of the year. Pin this!" Exactly. They only understand when it hits the wallet. Viewers spiked past 30,000, reaction emojis and exclamation marks pouring down the screen like a flood. Malik didn't rush. He leaned back, eyes steady. When he spoke again, his voice was just as even. "Your company can spin this, can draft press releases to explain, but tomorrow's stock numbers will tell the truth, and I'll make sure everyone sees them." A murmur from the back row died instantly under the weight of the moment. No one tried to joke. No one tried to break the silence. This was Malik's space now. He didn't need to check their faces to know his words had landed. Each one reacted differently. A bowed head, a tight swallow, a restless glance around for an exit. But all of them were locked in this small, inescapable box, where every look was caught on camera. And when Malik tilted his head slightly as if about to reveal the next move in his game, every lens in the room trained on him, waiting. Because if that last line had struck at their pride, what came next would hit the very foundation of the airline's power. 6 weeks after the flight that changed everything, the skies over the airline's headquarters seemed unusually bright. Not from summer sunlight, but from a rare sense of relief threading through hallways that usually echoed only with hurried footsteps and clipped phone calls. In the top-floor boardroom, the lights were on early. A wall-mounted screen showed revenue charts, the green line climbing steadily as if to prove one thing. The changes Malik had demanded that day weren't just carried out, and they were starting to pay off. The head of market analytics rose, voice careful but eyes betraying a hint of pride. Revenue from minority customer groups is up more than 30% year over year. Customer retention has increased 17%. Positive feedback on social media is at a record high. Numbers. once only highlighted when they dropped, were now displayed like living proof that change wasn't just a slogan. Side charts added more detail, a sharp drop in complaints, especially among passengers who had historically reported discrimination most often. At one end of the table, the HR director held a slim file, a report on the rollout of the company's anti-bias training program. We've completed the entire frontline staff training. Initial feedback is strong. Some employees admitted they didn't think they had biases until they went through the scenario exercises. No one said Malik's name aloud, but it hung in the air. A quiet acknowledgement that without that afternoon, there would be no green line on the chart. On the secondary screen, images from the new ad campaign appeared. Flight attendants of varied ages, skin tones, and accents, passengers smiling together at check-in. The words, "Dignity is non-negotiable," stamped in bold against the airline's blue. This wasn't just branding, it was a public declaration that respect for customers was no longer optional, but a condition for survival. Beyond the building, reactions didn't stop at praise. Some competitors quietly studied the airline's process, weighing whether to follow suit. The air travel industry, conservative and slow to adapt, was showing small but undeniable tremors. The meeting ended in an atmosphere of relief mixed with caution. Because even with the numbers in their favor, everyone knew this success had grown from an incident they would never want repeated. And more importantly, Malik was still out there, a wild card who could appear at any time to see if they'd kept their word. In the last 6 weeks, the company had learned one truth. The fastest path upward wasn't just about cutting costs or flashy ads, but about proving to the world that they had truly changed. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would decide whether they had escaped a storm or stepped into another low-pressure system. 6 weeks on, the faces of those who had stood at the front line of the crisis had changed as much as the airline's new logo. Clara Simmons, the woman who once blocked Seat 1A with a voice sweet as sugar and sharp as glass, no longer wore a flight attendant's uniform. She was still in aviation, but in a role that surprised many former colleagues, training consultant for the airline's anti-bias programs. At first, her presence in the sessions sparked debate. But Clara chose to begin every class with, "I was on the wrong side of this story. And that day taught me a lesson I will never forget." Not everyone believed in her change, but her public ownership of the past forced at least some people into quiet reflection. Gregory Hale didn't land so softly. Just 2 weeks after the incident, he lost a long-term contract with a major corporate partner. The client stating outright that his behavior and image on social media made continued association impossible. Gregory called it a media misunderstanding, but no one seemed willing to listen. From being a front-row regular at major conferences, he vanished from big events, leaving rumors that he was seeking a career pivot. Meanwhile, higher up in the industry, the phrase Malik Protocol began appearing in internal memos at other airlines. No one openly admitted copying a competitor's model, but the steps were suspiciously similar. Mandatory bias recognition and response training, customer interaction surveillance cameras, transparent complaint reporting. Some even hired the exact consultancy Malik had named in his demands, as if to shorten their reform curve. PR analysts called it the chain reaction effect. One company changing because it had to, and the rest changing to avoid the same fate. But in private conversations, some executives admitted they were starting to see the financial upside of fair treatment. Rising revenue, improved brand image, and reduced legal exposure. Malik, of course, didn't comment on each airline. He made just one public appearance in an interview, smiling when asked about the Malik Protocol. If they follow it because they want to do the right thing, I'm glad. If they follow it just to protect their profits, the result's still the same. The answer, part satire, part pragmatism, spread quickly online, often paired with images of Malik in Seat 1A from that day. But the story wasn't closed. If the last 6 weeks had proven anything, it was this. The impact of a timely action could spread further than anyone expected. And the next wave might not stop at aviation. 6 weeks had passed, yet the name Malik Davenport kept surfacing in places he'd never set foot. Not on tabloid covers, not in lengthy self-promoting interviews, but in the lecture slides of elite business schools. In an East Coast MBA lecture hall, students watched as the title, "Economic Justice as Competitive Advantage," appeared on screen. Below it, a photo of first class, Malik in seat 1A, hands folded, gaze calm. The professor didn't begin with profit margins or market share, but with the moment Malik had said, "In the digital age, discrimination isn't just wrong, it's expensive." Students scribbled notes, drawn not just to the crisp wording, but to the fact that this was living proof ethics and profit didn't have to be at odds. What looked like a seating dispute had become the starting point for an industry-wide reform. And more importantly, a principle transferable across sectors. Risk management seminars began citing the event as a case of proactive crisis management, showing that fixing the root cause avoided short-term losses and unlocked long-term growth. In hospitality, one major chain adopted nearly every element of the Malik Protocol, and the following quarter saw record gains in a customer segment they had long neglected. The curious thing was Malik's absence from the spotlight. He declined speaker invitations, wrote no book, gave no TED-style retelling. But that silence made his name more durable. Every time someone mentioned the Malik Protocol or quoted him, the mental image was automatic. A calm, steady man smart enough to turn a disadvantage into an economic lever. Among investors, a few close associates said Malik's work schedule hadn't changed. Most of his time still went to new deals. But they also knew he was quietly watching, not just that airline, but any company standing on the same fault line. The ripple had gone far beyond aviation. It now posed a question to every business. If a crisis unfolds in front of millions, will it destroy you or define you? And somewhere, Malik knew the story wasn't done. Because the greatest impact of a reform wave isn't where it starts, but where it strikes next. 1 year after that turbulent afternoon in first class, Malik Davenport stood at the podium of a global leadership conference. The hall was packed, front rows filled with CEOs, policymakers, and power brokers in the investment world. Overhead, a spotlight carved a neat circle of light around him, setting him apart from the sea of faces below. He didn't begin with thanks or pleasantries. Malik held the microphone, letting a pause stretch long enough for heads to lift in attention. Then he spoke, voice deep and deliberate, each word measured as if weighed beforehand. Power without purpose is noise. Power with purpose changes systems. No one had written that line for him. It was the distillation of years of experience, and of one flight that had turned a personal moment into the starting point for an industry-wide reform. Chairs shifted softly as people leaned forward. Some scribbled notes. Others simply sat still, eyes fixed on him, replaying moments in their own lives when they had held power, but failed to use it at the right time. Malik recounted that day briefly, not to boast but to underline a principle. When you stay silent in the face of injustice, you don't just lose your own rights. You hand someone else the license to keep going. He didn't dwell on the money the airline lost or the policies rewritten. Instead, he spoke of passengers he'd never meet. People now able to board a plane without having to prove they deserved the seat they'd already paid for. Money can move markets, Malik said, but dignity is what moves people. When he stopped speaking, his gaze swept the room, one person at a time. No music, no flashy graphics, just the stillness after a statement, and the way that stillness carried his words further. Then, as if awakened by an unspoken cue, the audience rose in unison. Applause erupted, first in sharp bursts, then slowing into a steady rhythm heavy with respect. Malik remained still, no waving, no repeated nods, letting them keep the moment for themselves, for the feeling of having shared something of real weight. But in that noise and light, Malik knew this was not an ending, just another chapter. And the next one could begin anywhere, even in another first-class cabin. That afternoon, after his keynote, Malik entered the VIP lounge at the airport for his flight to Zurich. The movement in the lounge was smooth as water. The scent of Arabica coffee mingled with the polished wood warmth of the premium check-in counters. A staffer from a rival airline stepped out from the desk, manifest in hand. Malik was about to pass when he heard a voice he knew instantly, enough to make him stop. "Good afternoon, Mr. Davenport. I'll assist you with your first-class check-in. Gregory Hale." No longer in his light-colored suit and platinum priority lapel pin, now in a crisp white shirt, pale blue tie, the uniform of a passenger service agent. The small name tag was the only sign he was that Gregory from a year ago. His smile was service perfect. Wide enough, even enough, nothing extra. But his eyes? They betrayed it. Drifting, searching for an anchor somewhere outside this exchange. Malik didn't speak right away. He watched. The way Gregory signed forms, the slight tighten of his grip on the ticket, the way he avoided eye contact. Not from fear, but from the deep awareness that they both remembered that day in first class. "Still in aviation," Malik said quietly, just for the two of them. "Different route." Gregory's smile wavered. "Work is work. We all adapt." Malik's gaze flicked toward the first-class seats beyond the counter. "Yes, adapt or get replaced." Gregory scanned the ticket. The machine beeped, printing a boarding pass. Seat 1A. Malik took it without comment, but let his eyes pause on the number. A silent nod to the strange cycles of fate. As Malik stepped through the gate, Gregory stayed at the counter, smile fixed, eyes somewhere else entirely. In the space where memory and present overlap, leaving a bitterness only he could taste. Malik didn't turn back, but he knew Gregory was watching. Some victories need no applause. Some lessons don't need to be repeated twice. And if anyone on that flight asked Malik what it was like to see Gregory again, he might just shrug. Life has a way of making educational moments. In the narrow aisle to first class, the carpet's plush under his shoes felt like a familiar reminder. Malik stowed his briefcase overhead, lowered himself into seat 1A. The spot that a year ago had been the center of a storm and the spark for sweeping change. Outside, the late sun angled across the aircraft's white fuselage in long gold streaks. From here, the airport's noise was softened. Just the faint hum of engines and the rustle of a magazine a row behind. Malik tilted the window shade up. The tarmac stretched out, luggage carts moving slowly, the runway drawing a straight white line to the horizon. He followed that line, as if he could see where it vanished into the pale blue. A young flight attendant placed a glass of water on the side table. Malik nodded in thanks, turning the glass slowly in his hand. His thoughts were already ahead of the plane, traveling to some other place where a similar moment might be quietly taking shape. A smile touched his face. Not triumph, not even satisfaction. It was small, contained, almost private. As if reminding himself that day was only a chapter and the book was still open. A few passengers stole glances at him. Not all recognized Malik Davenport, but there was something about him. The unhurried composure, the observant eyes, the unreadable smile. Engines surged, vibrations rolling through the cabin floor. Malik turned back to the window. The runway slid away beneath them. The sky ahead widened. And somewhere, and not from him, but from a higher narrator's voice in the story, the thought came, and somewhere in the sky ahead, another battle was waiting. The plane banked upward. No one knew where Malik's next chapter would land. But one thing was certain. Wherever he touched down, someone would remember the story, and someone else would have to relearn the meaning of the word deserve. Because the sky is wide, and if you're patient and alert, some confrontations will always find their way back to you. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.